Humans don't always ruin their lives by accident. Sometimes they call it a brilliant idea. Number 1. Some mistakes happen in seconds. Others begin with absolute confidence. In 1993, a man named John Darwin from England decided the perfect solution to financial trouble was to fake his own death in a canoeing accident. Insurance money would solve everything, right? The plan actually worked at first. His wife collected hundreds of thousands of dollars, neighbors mourned him, and investigators believed he had drowned. The only tiny problem was that John was still very much alive. He secretly lived next door in a hidden room, occasionally sneaking around his own neighborhood like a discount version of Bigfoot. Years later, convinced everyone had forgotten, the couple attempted to move to Panama and start a glamorous new life. Instead, investigators discovered an old family photograph showing John alive during the years he was supposedly dead. One picture destroyed an entire fantasy. The insurance money vanished, both spouses landed in prison, and John became famous worldwide, not for escaping life, but for proving that the worst place to hide is usually right next door. Number 2. Winning the lottery is supposed to solve problems, not manufacture brand new disasters. Yet that's exactly what happened to William Bud Post after winning more than $16 million in the Pennsylvania lottery. Within weeks, relatives appeared from nowhere demanding money. Strangers invented heartbreaking stories, and every terrible financial idea suddenly sounded brilliant to him. Instead of slowing down, Bud bought airplanes, expensive cars, restaurants, and investments he barely understood. Friends convinced him to finance impossible business ventures, while one family member actually hired someone to kill him in hopes of collecting part of the fortune sooner. Yes, becoming rich somehow made Thanksgiving dramatically more complicated. Before long, debts overwhelmed the jackpot, businesses collapsed, and the fortune disappeared faster than free samples at a warehouse store. He eventually filed for bankruptcy and spent much of his later life living modestly again. His story remains one of America's greatest reminders that money doesn't automatically improve decision-making. Sometimes it simply gives bad decisions a much larger budget. Number 3. Few terrible ideas have ever started with the words, "Watch this," but Larry Walters proved they absolutely should. In 1982, the California truck driver dreamed of flying without becoming a pilot. His solution was breathtakingly simple and spectacularly reckless. He strapped 45 weather balloons filled with helium to an ordinary lawn chair, packed sandwiches, soft drinks, a BB gun for landing, and expected to float a few hundred feet above his backyard. Instead, he rocketed nearly 16,000 feet into the sky, drifting directly into controlled airspace where shocked airline pilots radioed air traffic control to report seeing a man relaxing in a lawn chair among commercial airplanes. Larry was far too frightened to shoot enough balloons for a controlled descent, so he drifted for hours before finally becoming tangled in power lines. Miraculously, he survived with only minor injuries before police arrested him. When reporters later asked whether he regretted the stunt, Larry simply replied that a man can't just sit around forever. Technically true, but sitting in your backyard would have been considerably cheaper. Quick question: what city are you watching from? Let me know below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more unbelievable true stories. Number 4. Imagine believing you could outsmart one of the greatest financial minds in history simply because you had access to easy money. That's exactly what happened to Jerome Kerviel, a relatively unknown trader working for a major French bank. Instead of carefully following company rules, he secretly placed gigantic unauthorized trades worth tens of billions of dollars, convincing himself he could always fix any losses before anyone noticed. For a while, luck disguised itself as genius. Small victories inflated his confidence until he believed he was untouchable. Then the market turned against him. Overnight, the hidden positions exploded into one of the largest trading disasters ever recorded, costing the bank nearly $7 billion. His career vanished instantly. His reputation became synonymous with reckless arrogance, and courts eventually convicted him. It's an unforgettable lesson that confidence without limits doesn't create brilliance. It simply gives disaster enough time to become historically expensive. Number 5. Sometimes greed whispers instead of shouting. In 2008, a Chicago businessman named Bernard Madoff had already built enormous wealth and respect on Wall Street. Most people would have retired comfortably. Instead, he convinced himself he could keep one of history's largest Ponzi schemes alive forever. Investors trusted him because everyone else trusted him. Celebrities, charities, retirees, and lifelong friends handed over billions believing their futures were safe. Behind the polished reputation, however, there were no miraculous investments, just old money paying new investors while the hole grew deeper every year. When the financial crisis struck, too many clients wanted their money back at once, exposing decades of deception almost overnight. The collapse erased billions of dollars, destroyed countless retirement savings, and shattered families who had trusted him completely. Madoff didn't fail because he lacked success. He failed because he believed success made him impossible to catch. Number 6. Adventure sounds wonderful until confidence replaces preparation. In 1996, experienced climber Beck Weathers joined an expedition to Mount Everest, determined to stand on the highest point on Earth. The summit itself wasn't the terrible decision. Ignoring worsening weather forecasts and continuing upward despite obvious danger was. As powerful storms rolled across the mountain, visibility disappeared and temperatures plunged far below zero. Climbers became separated, oxygen supplies dwindled, and survival turned into pure luck. Beck was eventually left for dead after rescuers believed nobody could survive the brutal conditions. Against every expectation, he regained consciousness hours later and somehow staggered back toward camp through blinding snow. Although he miraculously survived, severe frostbite cost him both hands and much of his face, requiring years of reconstructive surgery. Everest doesn't care about confidence, ambition, or impressive resumes. Gravity and weather have never accepted motivational speeches. Number 7. Nobody expects a single wrong turn to become one of history's greatest military disasters, yet that's exactly what happened during Napoleon Bonaparte's invasion of Russia. Convinced his unmatched army could force a quick victory, Napoleon marched more than 500,000 soldiers deep into Russian territory. His confidence bordered on absolute certainty. The Russians simply kept retreating, destroying food supplies and villages behind them, leaving almost nothing for the invading army to survive on. When Napoleon finally reached Moscow, he discovered an empty city consumed by fire instead of the glorious surrender he expected. Then winter arrived. Starvation, disease, freezing temperatures, and constant attacks turned the retreat into unimaginable catastrophe. Fewer than 100,000 soldiers returned home. Napoleon had won countless brilliant battles before, but one overconfident decision erased years of military dominance. History repeatedly proves that nature is undefeated, and arrogance usually volunteers for the rematch. Number 8. In 1986, a Philadelphia man named John DeLorean already possessed something millions dreamed about. He had fame, engineering talent, and the legendary sports car that would later become immortal in American pop culture through Back to the Future. Unfortunately, success wasn't enough. His struggling automobile company desperately needed cash, and instead of accepting defeat or restructuring the business, DeLorean agreed to participate in what he believed would be a massive cocaine deal designed to rescue his company. Federal agents had been watching the operation from the beginning. Hidden cameras captured him discussing millions of dollars while convinced he was making the smartest business decision of his life. Although he was ultimately acquitted after successfully arguing entrapment, the damage proved irreversible. Investors disappeared, his company collapsed forever, and the stainless steel sports car became more famous than the man who created it. Sometimes desperation disguises itself as opportunity until the handcuffs appear. Number 9. There are bad vacation ideas, and then there's Timothy Dexter's level of confidence. Before becoming famous as one of America's luckiest businessmen, Dexter repeatedly ignored expert advice because he believed everyone else was wrong. One unforgettable example involved shipping thousands of bed warmers, heavy metal pans used to heat mattresses, to the Caribbean. Every experienced merchant laughed. Why would tropical islands need equipment designed for freezing winters? It sounded like the worst business decision imaginable. Then pure accident stepped in, wearing a pirate's hat. Local sugar plantation owners discovered the sturdy metal pans were perfect for scooping boiling molasses during sugar production. Dexter accidentally sold the entire shipment for an enormous profit. Instead of learning that he'd been unbelievably lucky, he concluded he was a financial genius whose instincts could never fail. That's the dangerous part about lucky mistakes. They often convince people they possess wisdom when they simply survived spectacularly bad judgment. Number 10. In 1987, stockbroker Michael Milken sat at the top of Wall Street, earning more money than most people could imagine. Nicknamed the Junk Bond King, he revolutionized corporate finance and built an empire fueled by confidence, influence, and astonishing profits. The smart decision would have been stopping while he was already a legend. Instead, success convinced him that rules were optional. Investigators uncovered insider trading schemes, securities fraud, and financial practices that crossed legal lines repeatedly. Suddenly, the man once treated like a financial wizard found himself facing federal prosecutors instead of investors. He eventually pleaded guilty, paid hundreds of millions in penalties, and served time in prison. His remarkable career became a cautionary tale taught in business schools across America. The biggest mistake wasn't creating wealth. It was believing years of winning somehow rewrote the rulebook for everyone else. Number 11. Sometimes history changes because one person refuses to admit they are lost. In 1846, the Donner Party left Illinois hoping to reach California before winter. Along the way, they accepted advice promoting a so-called shortcut called Hastings Cutoff. It promised a faster route across the West, despite almost nobody having successfully tested it with large wagon trains. Saving a few weeks sounded irresistible. Instead, families found themselves carving roads through mountains, crossing brutal salt flats, losing precious livestock, and wasting valuable time. By the moment they reached the Sierra Nevada, heavy snow trapped them completely. Rescue efforts came far too late for many travelers, and unimaginable desperation followed during the frozen months. The shortcut ended up costing dozens of lives instead of saving time. Every experienced traveler already knew the safest road. Unfortunately, confidence often travels much faster than wisdom ever does. Number 12. Few people have ever gambled more spectacularly than businessman Gerald Ratner. During the late 1980s, his jewelry company dominated Britain's retail market and generated incredible profits. Then came one speech that business schools still discuss decades later. Speaking before industry leaders, Ratner joked that some of his company's products were total crap, and even compared one inexpensive item to a disappointing shrimp sandwich that would probably last longer than the jewelry itself. The audience laughed. Customers did not. Headlines exploded across newspapers. Shoppers stopped trusting the brand almost overnight, and sales collapsed with breathtaking speed. Billions of dollars in company value disappeared because the CEO accidentally convinced the public that his own products were worthless. His name became permanently attached to one of history's greatest public relations disasters. Sometimes honesty is refreshing. Sometimes it sends your entire business directly off a financial cliff. Number 13. By 1999, NASA had accomplished miracles that once belonged only in science fiction. Engineers could send spacecraft millions of miles through space with astonishing precision. Then, one tiny oversight created one of the most expensive mistakes ever recorded. While building the Mars Climate Orbiter, one engineering team calculated measurements using the metric system, while another relied on traditional American units. Nobody noticed the mismatch until the spacecraft reached Mars. Instead of entering orbit as planned, it descended far too low into the planet's atmosphere, where it was destroyed forever. Hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars literally vanished because pounds and newtons refused to cooperate. It wasn't sabotage, faulty rockets, or alien interference. It was paperwork. Somewhere, a calculator quietly watched history happen. The lesson remains painfully simple. Even the smartest people on Earth can lose an entire spacecraft by forgetting that math demands everyone speak the same language. Number 14. Robert Falcon. Scott dreamed of becoming the first explorer to reach the South Pole, and in 1911 his expedition pushed deeper into Antarctica than almost anyone before them. The mission required perfect planning because the frozen continent forgives absolutely nothing. Unfortunately, Scott made several decisions that slowly turned ambition into catastrophe. He relied heavily on ponies that struggled terribly in deep snow, instead of trusting dog teams already proven by Arctic explorers. Supplies became harder to move, energy disappeared faster than expected, and schedules slipped behind. When Scott's exhausted team finally reached the South Pole, another crushing surprise awaited them. Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen had arrived weeks earlier and left a flag behind. The race was already over. During the brutal journey home, Scott and his companions perished in blizzard conditions only miles from life-saving supplies. Sometimes finishing second is heartbreaking. Sometimes chasing first costs absolutely everything. Number 15. In 1978, a man named Richard Fuld began climbing the ranks at Lehman Brothers, eventually becoming one of the most powerful executives on Wall Street. For years, his aggressive leadership generated enormous profits, earning him admiration throughout the financial world. But success slowly evolved into dangerous overconfidence. Even as warning signs spread across the housing market, Lehman continued borrowing staggering amounts of money while investing heavily in risky mortgage-backed securities. Advisors urged caution. Critics predicted disaster. Fuld believed the company could weather any storm because it always had before. Then the financial crisis struck with full force. Investors fled, confidence evaporated, and the legendary investment bank collapsed into bankruptcy in 2008. The failure triggered global panic, accelerated the financial crisis, and erased countless jobs and retirement savings. Sometimes the most expensive decision isn't taking a risk, it's refusing to admit the risk has already changed. Number 16. In 1994, an experienced cave diver named Jochen Hasenmeyer warned repeatedly that underwater exploration rewards patience far more than bravery. Yet across the diving world, countless explorers kept pushing deeper into flooded cave systems, believing experience alone could overcome impossible conditions. One particularly ambitious expedition ignored worsening visibility, underestimated air consumption, and ventured beyond established safety limits simply because turning back felt like admitting defeat. Inside narrow underwater passages, silt exploded into thick clouds, destroying visibility within seconds. The exit route disappeared into total darkness while precious oxygen continued disappearing with every breath. Rescue teams later described the scene as a maze where every wrong turn multiplied the danger. The tragedy permanently changed technical diving procedures around the world, emphasizing strict turnaround rules and emergency planning. Caves never negotiate, panic never solves geometry, and pride becomes astonishingly heavy when every breath has an expiration date. Number 17. For decades, Kodak wasn't just winning the photography business, it practically owned it. Families across America trusted those bright yellow film boxes to preserve birthdays, weddings, vacations, and every awkward Christmas sweater ever knitted. Then something extraordinary happened. One of Kodak's own engineers invented the first digital camera during the 1970s. It was bulky, slow, and primitive, but it represented the future. Instead of celebrating the breakthrough, company executives panicked. They feared digital photography would destroy their wildly profitable film business, so they quietly buried the technology instead of aggressively developing it. Competitors eventually embraced digital cameras while Kodak remained emotionally attached to film, like someone insisting cassette tapes would defeat streaming music. By the time leadership realized consumers had already moved on, it was far too late. A company that literally invented the future managed to miss it because protecting yesterday felt safer than embracing tomorrow. Number 18. The Titanic has become history's most famous maritime disaster, But one overlooked decision made the tragedy even more heartbreaking. During the ship's construction, engineers designed enough space for additional lifeboats that could have dramatically increased survival rates. Unfortunately, executives worried too many lifeboats would clutter the luxurious promenade decks and make the magnificent ocean liner appear less elegant to wealthy passengers. Appearance quietly defeated preparation. The ship was proudly advertised as nearly unsinkable, encouraging dangerous confidence throughout the voyage. When the iceberg struck during that cold April night, thousands suddenly depended on lifeboats that simply weren't there. Crew members struggled through confusion while hundreds of empty seats even left the ship because evacuation procedures had never been properly rehearsed. The disaster forever changed international maritime safety laws. Ironically, the decision intended to preserve the ship's beautiful appearance became one of history's ugliest examples of corporate overconfidence. Number 19. If you've ever ignored a strange noise coming from your car because it seemed expensive to investigate, you're already familiar with the psychology behind one of history's greatest engineering disasters. In 1986, engineers working on the Space Shuttle Challenger repeatedly warned about dangerous problems involving rubber O-rings that sealed critical rocket joints during cold weather launches. Several experts strongly recommended delaying the mission because freezing temperatures increased the risk dramatically. Unfortunately, schedules, deadlines, and public expectations created enormous pressure to proceed anyway. Decision-makers convinced themselves previous close calls somehow proved the system was safe enough. 73 seconds after liftoff, the shuttle broke apart before millions of horrified television viewers. 7 astronauts lost their lives, and NASA faced years of painful investigation and rebuilding. The tragedy became a timeless reminder that ignoring expert warnings never makes problems disappear. It merely gives them a much larger audience. Number 20. Nobody likes admitting they made a mistake, especially after spending millions of dollars. That's exactly why the Concorde became such a fascinating example of what economists call the sunk cost fallacy. Britain and France invested enormous resources creating the world's fastest passenger airplane, capable of crossing the Atlantic in roughly half the usual time. Technologically, it was astonishing. Financially, it was another story. Operating costs remained incredibly high, tickets were affordable only for the wealthy, and profits never matched expectations. Instead of acknowledging the economic reality, governments continued supporting the project because abandoning it would have meant admitting earlier decisions had failed. The aircraft became an icon of engineering brilliance while quietly losing money year after year. Concorde proved something surprisingly human. Once people invest enough time, pride, and money into an idea, walking away often feels harder than continuing down an increasingly expensive road that clearly leads nowhere. Number 21. In 2004, a man named Brian Wells walked into a Pennsylvania bank wearing what appeared to be an explosive collar locked around his neck. He calmly handed a note demanding cash before leaving with the money, exactly as instructed. The shocking twist came moments later when police surrounded him in a parking lot. Wells desperately insisted the bomb was real and claimed strangers had forced him into an elaborate robbery scheme. Officers initially believed he was bluffing to escape arrest. While negotiations continued, the device exploded before everyone's eyes, killing him instantly. Later investigations uncovered an unbelievably complex criminal plot involving manipulation, greed, and astonishingly reckless decisions by multiple conspirators. Whether Wells fully understood what he had agreed to remains heavily debated even today. One terrible choice, to participate instead of immediately seeking help, placed him inside a nightmare no one could possibly control once the countdown truly began. Number 22. Blockbuster Video once felt as permanent as Friday night pizza and microwave popcorn. At its peak, millions of Americans wandered brightly lit aisles, searching for the perfect movie before racing home to beat the late fee clock. Then came a tiny startup called Netflix. During the early 2000s, Netflix actually approached Blockbuster with an offer to sell the entire company for what now seems like pocket change. Blockbuster executives laughed and rejected the proposal, convinced people would always prefer driving to physical stores rather than waiting for DVDs by mail. Later, they underestimated streaming for exactly the same reason. Customers, however, loved convenience more than nostalgia. Within a few short years, rental stores disappeared across America, while Netflix transformed entertainment forever. Blockbuster didn't collapse because technology moved too quickly. It collapsed because leadership believed yesterday's success automatically guaranteed tomorrow's customers would behave exactly the same way forever. Number 23. History remembers King Croesus of Lydia as one of the richest men who ever lived, but wealth has always suffered from one dangerous side effect. It encourages people to believe they receive better advice than everyone else. Before attacking the expanding Persian Empire, Croesus consulted the famous Oracle of Delphi, asking whether he should begin the war. The mysterious reply promised that if he crossed the river, a great empire would fall. Delighted by what sounded like guaranteed victory, Croesus marched confidently into battle without considering another interpretation. The prophecy turned out to be perfectly accurate. A great empire did collapse. Unfortunately, it was his own. Persian forces crushed Lydia, captured Croesus, and ended his kingdom forever. The oracle never lied. Croesus simply heard exactly what he wanted to hear. Confirmation bias existed long before social media. Ancient kings were perfectly capable of fooling themselves without any internet assistance. Number 24. In 2011, a Japanese man known online only as SAL9000 became internationally famous for marrying a virtual girlfriend from a handheld video game. To him, the digital relationship felt comforting, predictable, and free from the complications of real life. Friends laughed, reporters filled headlines, and the unusual wedding attracted worldwide attention. For several years, he genuinely believed technology had finally created the perfect companion. Then, reality quietly updated itself. The company discontinued support for the gaming platform, software services disappeared, and the character he loved became increasingly difficult to access as devices aged and failed. His relationship hadn't ended because of betrayal or heartbreak. It ended because customer support eventually expired. The story isn't really about video games. It's about building your emotional future on something completely controlled by someone else's business decisions. Even love becomes surprisingly fragile when it depends on a charging cable. Number 25. In the early 1970s, an ambitious young investor named Ronald Wayne made a decision that seemed perfectly sensible at the time. He had become one of the 3 original co-founders of a tiny startup called Apple, alongside Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Unlike his energetic partners, Wayne worried about financial liability. If the company failed, creditors could pursue his personal assets, and he wanted no part of that risk. Just 12 days after signing the partnership agreement, he sold his 10% ownership for only $800, believing peace of mind was worth far more than uncertainty. At that moment, nobody could have predicted Apple's future. Today, that same stake would be worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Wayne has repeatedly said he doesn't regret his decision because it made sense with the information he had. Still, history rarely offers a more breathtaking example of selling certainty far too cheaply. Number 26. The city of Centralia, Pennsylvania, looked like countless small American mining towns where generations expected life to remain comfortably predictable. Then, in 1962, officials approved what seemed like a routine decision. A local landfill fire would simply be burned out, just as similar fires had been handled before. Unfortunately, flames reached abandoned underground coal seams, stretching beneath the entire community. Instead of disappearing, the fire continued spreading silently below streets, homes, and businesses. Year after year, toxic gases escaped through cracks in the ground, while the earth itself grew dangerously unstable. Families slowly abandoned neighborhoods they had occupied for decades, churches closed, schools disappeared, and roads eventually buckled from intense underground heat. More than 60 years later, the coal fire still burns beneath the town. One ordinary maintenance decision transformed a thriving American community into one of the world's most haunting ghost towns, proving small mistakes sometimes refuse to stay small. Number 27. If confidence alone determined success, Robert Falcon Scott would have conquered Antarctica with ease. Yet another unforgettable expedition proves that overestimating yourself can be just as dangerous in the sky. In 1930, Australian pilot Charles Kingsford Smith vanished while attempting an ambitious flight across the world. Inspired by previous triumphs, many aviators began believing long-distance flights had become almost routine. One experienced pilot ignored worsening weather forecasts, convinced his skills could overcome conditions that grounded everyone else. Friends urged patience. He chose pride. Shortly after takeoff, violent storms swallowed the aircraft, leaving rescuers with almost no clues about what had happened. The tragedy echoed across the aviation community, reminding pilots that experience is never the same thing as invincibility. Airplanes don't reward confidence. They reward preparation, discipline, and the rare ability to postpone a flight when every instinct insists on pushing forward instead. Number 28. During the California Gold Rush, thousands of hopeful Americans abandoned stable jobs, comfortable homes, and established businesses after hearing stories of ordinary men becoming rich overnight. One merchant named Levi Strauss made a very different decision. Instead of chasing gold himself, he sold durable supplies to miners. Meanwhile, countless prospectors emptied savings accounts, borrowed money, and traveled thousands of exhausting miles believing fortune waited beneath the next shovel of dirt. Many discovered only freezing rivers, expensive equipment, dangerous working conditions, and crushing disappointment. Some spent years searching before returning home poorer than when they had left. Others never returned at all. The greatest irony is almost poetic. While dreamers risked everything chasing buried treasure, the people consistently making money were the shopkeepers selling boots, tools, food, and sturdy denim pants. Sometimes the worst investment isn't buying the shovel. It's believing you'll definitely be the one holding the gold. Number 29. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge opened in Washington state during 1940 with tremendous public excitement. Engineers celebrated its elegant, slender design, which reduced construction costs while creating one of America's most beautiful suspension bridges. Unfortunately, beauty quietly defeated practicality. Soon after opening, motorists noticed the roadway rising and falling dramatically whenever strong winds arrived. Locals even nicknamed it Galloping Gertie, treating the strange movement almost like roadside entertainment. Instead of immediately closing the bridge for major redesign, officials hoped the unusual swaying remained mostly harmless. Then, on one unforgettable November morning, steady winds triggered violent twisting that exceeded every expectation. Cameras captured the bridge bending, buckling, and finally collapsing into the river below in one of engineering's most famous failures. Miraculously, only one dog died in the disaster. Engineers worldwide never forgot the lesson. Nature doesn't negotiate with optimistic calculations or impressive architectural sketches. Number 30. Few disasters unfolded more slowly than the collapse of the Aral Sea. During the 1960s, Soviet planners believed they had discovered the perfect economic strategy. By diverting enormous rivers feeding the sea, they could irrigate vast cotton fields and dramatically increase agricultural production. On paper, the idea appeared brilliant. In reality, it became an environmental catastrophe unfolding year after year. As river water disappeared, the massive inland sea steadily shrank, leaving fishing ports stranded in deserts, commercial fleets resting uselessly on dry sand, and entire communities without their traditional livelihoods. Toxic dust from the exposed seabed spread across nearby towns, creating serious health problems for generations. What had once ranked among the world's largest lakes became a patchwork of isolated pools visible from space. The decision promised prosperity but delivered one of history's greatest ecological disasters. Sometimes success measured on spreadsheets completely ignores the landscape outside the office window. Number 31. By the late 1990s, Nokia stood at the absolute summit of the mobile phone industry. Its devices seemed indestructible, batteries lasted forever, and millions of Americans joked that a Nokia could survive almost anything except being forgotten in yesterday's jeans. Executives genuinely believed their dominance would continue for decades. Then smartphones arrived, bringing touchscreens, powerful software, and entirely new ways of thinking about mobile technology. Inside Nokia, many engineers recognized the threat early and pushed aggressively for change. Senior leadership hesitated, worried that abandoning familiar designs would alienate loyal customers and disrupt profitable manufacturing systems. Competitors moved quickly while Nokia debated. Within only a few years, the company that once defined the mobile phone market had surrendered its leadership almost completely. The greatest mistake wasn't failing to invent something new. It was believing customers would always prefer the world exactly as it already existed, simply because yesterday had been incredibly successful. Number 32. Few military campaigns demonstrate the danger of ego quite like Adolf Hitler's decision to invade the Soviet Union in 1941. After rapid victories across Europe, Hitler became convinced his army was practically unstoppable. Experienced generals warned that Russia's enormous distances, brutal winters, and strained supply lines could destroy even the strongest military force. Hitler ignored nearly every caution. Operation Barbarossa began with spectacular success, reinforcing his belief that instinct mattered more than professional advice. Then reality arrived wearing snow instead of medals. Fuel disappeared, equipment froze, soldiers lacked winter clothing, and supply convoys stretched across impossible distances. Soviet resistance hardened while German momentum collapsed. What was intended to become history's greatest military triumph gradually transformed into one of history's greatest strategic disasters. The invasion permanently shifted the course of the Second World War. Sometimes winning too many battles creates the dangerous illusion that losing has somehow become impossible. Number 33. By the late 1990s, Yahoo ruled the internet the way shopping malls once ruled suburban America. Millions of people used its email service, search engine, news pages, and directory every single day. Then a small search startup called Google began attracting attention with a cleaner, faster approach. Yahoo actually had multiple opportunities to buy Google while it remained a tiny company with uncertain prospects. Executives hesitated, believing search alone wasn't the future because portals packed with advertisements would always generate greater profits. They underestimated how much people valued finding accurate information quickly. Google continued improving its technology while Yahoo became distracted chasing dozens of unrelated projects. Within a few years, the balance of power completely reversed. Today, Yahoo survives only as a shadow of its former influence, while Google became one of the world's most valuable companies. Missing opportunity often hurts more than surviving failure because you'll always wonder what almost happened. Number 34. In 1985, Coca-Cola made one of the boldest marketing decisions in American business history. After extensive taste tests suggested consumers preferred a sweeter formula, executives confidently announced New Coke, replacing the original recipe that generations had grown up with. On paper, the research looked flawless. In kitchens, diners, baseball stadiums, and family barbecues across America, the reaction became immediate outrage. Customers weren't simply buying a soft drink. They were buying childhood memories, summer vacations, 4th of July picnics, and decades of tradition sealed inside a familiar red can. Protest groups formed, thousands of angry letters flooded company headquarters, and loyal drinkers treated the recipe change almost like a personal betrayal. Only 79 days later, Coca-Cola restored the original formula as Coca-Cola Classic. The company recovered brilliantly, but the episode remains a legendary reminder that spreadsheets can measure preferences. They cannot measure emotional attachment or nostalgia. Number 35. The eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980 is remembered for extraordinary volcanic power, but one heartbreaking story reveals how stubbornness can become surprisingly expensive. Harry R. Truman, an 83-year-old lodge owner, refused repeated evacuation orders despite scientists warning that the volcano showed increasingly dangerous signs of eruption. Reporters interviewed him several times, and his calm confidence made him something of a folk hero. He insisted the mountain had been his neighbor for decades and wouldn't harm him now. Even as earthquakes intensified and steam explosions increased, Truman remained exactly where he was, convinced experts were exaggerating the danger. Then the mountain exploded with unimaginable force, burying his lodge beneath massive volcanic debris. His body was never recovered. Truman became an enduring symbol of independence, but also a powerful reminder that experience alone cannot negotiate with geology. Mountains rarely care how long you've lived beside them. Number 36. The Hindenburg airship represented the absolute peak of luxury travel during the 1930s. Crossing the Atlantic aboard the enormous flying vessel felt like sailing through the clouds inside a floating hotel, complete with dining rooms, elegant cabins, and breathtaking views. Yet one critical decision haunted its designers from the beginning. Because international politics limited access to non-flammable helium, engineers relied on highly combustible hydrogen instead. Everyone understood the risk, but many believed careful procedures would compensate for the dangerous choice. For several successful flights, they appeared correct. Then, during landing in New Jersey in 1937, a spark ignited leaking hydrogen. Within seconds, the magnificent airship became a towering inferno, witnessed by stunned crowds below. 36 people died, and public confidence in passenger airships vanished almost overnight. One compromise, accepted because better options seemed inconvenient, permanently changed the future of aviation and luxury travel forever. Number 37. Few financial bubbles captured human optimism quite like the Dutch tulip mania of the 17th century. At first, tulips were simply beautiful flowers imported from distant lands. Before long, however, ordinary people convinced themselves that rare bulbs would increase in value forever. Farmers, merchants, craftsmen, and professionals sold property, borrowed heavily, and traded life savings for flowers they often never even touched. Contracts changed hands repeatedly as prices climbed higher each week, making everyone feel like an investment genius. Sound familiar? Eventually, buyers stopped appearing. Prices collapsed almost instantly, leaving fortunes erased by something that looked remarkably similar to yesterday's garden decoration. Historians still debate exactly how widespread the financial devastation became, but the lesson remains timeless. Whenever people start insisting an asset can only become more valuable because everyone believes it will, history quietly reaches for the same old script and changes only the names. Number 38. In 1972, a group of experienced rugby players boarded a flight across the Andes Mountains, expecting nothing more dramatic than a competitive match. Instead, navigational mistakes, severe weather, and impossible terrain combined to produce one of history's most extraordinary survival stories. After the aircraft crashed high in the snow-covered mountains, survivors waited patiently for rescue, believing help would arrive within days. Then they heard heartbreaking news on a small radio. Search teams had officially ended the operation, assuming everyone on board had died. Suddenly, the group's biggest mistake became painfully obvious. They had spent precious time relying completely on outside rescue instead of preparing to save themselves. Eventually, two exhausted survivors undertook an almost impossible trek across frozen peaks, walking for days before finally finding help. Their courage saved the remaining passengers, proving that hope alone keeps people alive only temporarily. Action usually finishes the job. Number 39. One of history's most expensive acts of overconfidence happened before a single ship ever touched the water. In 1916, Canadian officials approved construction of the massive town of Val-Jalbert around a booming pulp and paper industry, convinced demand would remain strong for generations. Homes, schools, churches, hotels, and businesses quickly appeared, creating what seemed like a permanent community built for endless prosperity. The fatal mistake wasn't constructing the town. It was tying the entire future of thousands of people to one industry without preparing for change. As technology evolved and economic conditions shifted, the mill gradually became unprofitable. Eventually it closed, and almost overnight the thriving community emptied as families searched elsewhere for work. Today, beautifully preserved buildings stand frozen in time, attracting tourists instead of workers. Walking those silent streets feels like visiting a photograph. Prosperity built on a single assumption can disappear astonishingly fast when that assumption finally expires. Number 40. During the 1950s, Ford Motor Company believed it had discovered the perfect automobile to dominate the American market. After spending roughly $250 million on development and one of the largest advertising campaigns in history, executives proudly introduced the Edsel. They expected customers to line up around dealerships. Instead, buyers scratched their heads. The styling felt awkward, the pricing confused shoppers, quality problems appeared almost immediately, and the car somehow managed to disappoint nearly everyone at once. Inside Ford, few executives wanted to admit the project had gone terribly wrong because so much money and prestige had already been invested. Production continued while losses piled higher. Eventually, the company abandoned the Edsel entirely after losing an enormous fortune. Today, its name has become shorthand for spectacular business failure. Sometimes the most expensive mistake isn't building the wrong product. It's refusing to recognize customers never wanted it. Number 41. When Captain Edward Smith took command of the Titanic, he carried decades of experience and a reputation as one of Britain's finest sailors. Ironically, that success may have encouraged one of history's most dangerous assumptions. Despite repeated wireless warnings describing heavy ice directly ahead, the Titanic maintained an unusually high speed across the North Atlantic. Many officers believed the enormous liner could simply avoid any obstacle in time or survive minor impacts because of its advanced watertight compartments. Confidence quietly replaced caution. On that freezing April night, lookouts finally spotted the iceberg, but there wasn't enough distance left to avoid disaster completely. The collision lasted only seconds, yet it permanently altered maritime history. Smith's remarkable career ended beneath the Atlantic alongside more than 1,500 passengers and crew. Experience is invaluable, but it becomes surprisingly fragile the moment someone mistakes it for immunity against the unexpected. Number 42. The story of Pan American World Airways reads like a Hollywood screenplay with a heartbreaking final act. For decades, Pan Am represented glamour, innovation, and international adventure. Flying aboard one of its aircraft meant you had truly arrived. Yet during the airline industry's rapid transformation, executives repeatedly made costly strategic decisions that looked brilliant in boardrooms but disastrous in practice. Massive investments in expensive aircraft arrived just as fuel prices soared. Valuable routes were sold to cover mounting debts, leaving the airline with fewer ways to generate future revenue. Instead of adapting quickly to changing competition, leadership remained convinced Pan Am's legendary reputation would continue attracting loyal travelers forever. It didn't. By 1991, the airline that had practically invented the golden age of international travel shut down completely. The skies never stopped needing airplanes. They simply stopped rewarding companies that believed yesterday's prestige guaranteed tomorrow's survival. Number 43. In 1986, treasure hunter Tommy Thompson located one of the greatest underwater discoveries in American history: the wreck of the SS Central America, a steamship carrying tons of California gold rush treasure that had sunk in 1857. Investors celebrated, lawsuits followed, and millions of dollars in recovered gold changed hands. Then Thompson made the decision that destroyed everything. Rather than fully cooperating with courts handling disputes over the treasure, he disappeared completely, living under false identities for years while secretly moving money through complicated financial arrangements. Authorities finally captured him after more than a decade on the run. Even then, he refused to reveal the location of hundreds of missing gold coins, leading to years of additional imprisonment for contempt of court. Finding legendary treasure made him famous. Refusing to follow the law afterward transformed an extraordinary success story into a remarkably preventable personal disaster. Number 44. History remembers the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, but another engineering lesson unfolded inside Boston's Big Dig project. Planned as one of America's most ambitious highway improvements, the project promised smoother traffic, safer roads, and a brighter future for one of the nation's oldest cities. As construction continued, however, cost overruns multiplied, deadlines slipped repeatedly, and warning signs about certain construction methods received insufficient attention. Then tragedy struck when improperly secured ceiling panels in a highway tunnel collapsed, killing a motorist. Investigations uncovered design flaws, installation failures, and years of overlooked concerns hidden beneath layers of paperwork and optimism. The project eventually succeeded in transforming Boston's transportation system, but only after becoming one of the most expensive public infrastructure efforts in American history. The lesson reached far beyond engineering. Small shortcuts buried inside giant projects rarely stay buried forever. Eventually, gravity asks uncomfortable questions no committee can postpone. Number 45. When George Custer led the 7th Cavalry toward the Little Bighorn in 1876, he believed speed and aggressive action would deliver another dramatic victory. Reports suggested Native American forces were scattered and vulnerable. Instead of waiting for reinforcements, Custer divided his command into smaller detachments, assuming his opponents would retreat as they had during previous campaigns. They didn't. Thousands of determined Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors stood together in overwhelming numbers. The divided cavalry suddenly found itself isolated, outnumbered, and surrounded. Within hours, Custer and every soldier directly under his command were dead. The battle became one of the most studied military disasters in American history. Courage was never the issue. Overconfidence was. Sometimes bold leadership inspires remarkable victories. Other times it convinces talented people to march confidently into situations they never truly understood until escape was already impossible. Number 46. In the early 2000s, BlackBerry dominated the business world. Presidents carried one. Corporate executives refused to travel without one. The tiny keyboard became a badge of professional success, and many believed no serious business person would ever trade physical buttons for a touchscreen. Then Apple introduced the iPhone. BlackBerry executives dismissed it as an entertaining gadget, better suited for consumers than professionals. They believed email efficiency and keyboard accuracy would always matter more than apps, multimedia, and intuitive design. While competitors reinvented smartphones, BlackBerry kept refining a formula customers were already abandoning. Developers focused elsewhere, consumer excitement evaporated, and business clients gradually followed the crowd. Within only a few years, the company that had once defined mobile productivity became an afterthought. BlackBerry didn't fail because it lacked brilliant engineers. It failed because leadership confused current customer habits with permanent human behavior, a mistake history repeats with astonishing consistency. Number 47. Few expeditions demonstrate the cost of pride more vividly than Sir John Franklin's doomed search for the Northwest Passage. In 1845, Franklin sailed from England with 2 state-of-the-art ships, advanced technology, and enough supplies to inspire complete confidence. Many believed failure was practically impossible. Yet critical decisions quietly undermined the mission from the very beginning. The expedition relied heavily on thousands of poorly sealed canned food supplies, many contaminated with lead from rushed manufacturing. The ships also became trapped in Arctic ice far longer than expected, while officers clung to traditional naval discipline instead of adapting quickly to brutal polar conditions. Rescue missions eventually uncovered heartbreaking evidence that the crews abandoned their vessels and attempted an impossible march across frozen wilderness. Not a single member survived. Franklin's expedition wasn't defeated by one dramatic mistake. It was destroyed by several reasonable decisions that became catastrophic only after reality refused to cooperate. Number 48. In 1998, NASA launched the Mars Climate Orbiter with enormous expectations. Scientists had spent years preparing the mission, and taxpayers had invested hundreds of millions of dollars to place another sophisticated spacecraft around Mars. Everything appeared to be progressing perfectly until the probe approached the planet. Then it vanished. Engineers eventually uncovered a mistake almost too unbelievable to accept. One team had calculated critical measurements using the metric system, while another continued using traditional American units. Nobody caught the mismatch before launch. The spacecraft entered the Martian atmosphere far lower than intended and was destroyed forever. Imagine buying a luxury RV for a cross-country road trip, only to realize halfway through that one driver thinks every road sign is in miles, while the other insists they're kilometers. One simple communication failure erased years of work in seconds. Even rocket science occasionally loses to basic arithmetic. Number 49. The city of Pripyat in Ukraine was built as a model community for workers at the nearby Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Everything reflected confidence in modern engineering and careful planning. Then came the safety test during the early hours of April 26, 1986. Operators intentionally disabled several critical safety systems while attempting an experiment many engineers had already questioned. Small mistakes quickly combined into catastrophic ones. Within moments, reactor number 4 exploded, releasing radioactive material across much of Europe. Entire neighborhoods were abandoned forever, and more than 100,000 people lost their homes almost overnight. Pripyat transformed from a thriving city into a haunting time capsule where school books still sit open on dusty desks and amusement park rides never welcome their first passengers. The disaster reminds us that dangerous decisions rarely arrive alone. They usually travel in groups, quietly reinforcing one another until consequences become impossible to reverse. Number 50. The story of the Vasa warship sounds almost fictional, yet every remarkable detail actually happened. During the 17th century, Sweden wanted the most powerful warship in Europe, and King Gustavus Adolphus personally demanded more cannons, greater firepower, and unmatched prestige. Shipbuilders privately worried that each royal request made the vessel increasingly unstable, but nobody wanted to challenge the king directly. Construction continued despite growing concerns. Finally, in 1628, thousands gathered to watch the magnificent warship begin its maiden voyage. It sailed proudly for less than 1 mile. A strong gust of wind tilted the ship, water rushed through the open gun ports, and the mighty Vasa sank before horrified spectators. It remained underwater for more than 3 centuries before being recovered. The king received his impressive warship exactly as ordered. Unfortunately, gravity never signed the construction plans or attended the design meetings. Number 51. During the dot-com boom of the late 1990s, investors became convinced that the internet had permanently changed the rules of business. In fairness, they were half right. What they misunderstood was the idea that every company with a website automatically deserved millions of dollars. Startups with little more than clever logos, colorful presentations, and impossible promises attracted staggering investments despite generating almost no actual revenue. Some executives spent venture capital on extravagant offices, expensive parties, and advertising campaigns before selling a single profitable product. Wall Street celebrated every announcement while quietly ignoring balance sheets. Then reality interrupted the celebration. Investors finally demanded profits instead of promises, stock prices collapsed, and thousands of companies disappeared almost overnight. Billions evaporated in one of history's largest financial bubbles. Technology changed the world forever, but basic mathematics stubbornly refused to evolve alongside it, reminding everyone that excitement never replaces income. Number 52. Perhaps no treasure hunter ever made a more heartbreaking mistake than Mel Fisher before eventually finding success. For years, he searched relentlessly for the legendary Spanish galleon Nuestra Señora de Atocha, convinced unimaginable riches rested beneath the ocean floor. Friends encouraged him to quit after repeated failures consumed fortunes and tested every ounce of patience he possessed. Then tragedy struck when one of his support boats sank during a storm, taking the lives of his son, daughter-in-law, and another crew member. Most people would have walked away forever. Fisher faced the impossible choice between abandoning everything or continuing despite unbearable grief. Although he ultimately discovered the treasure years later, he often admitted the gold could never replace what had been lost. His story proves that not every successful ending erases terrible decisions or impossible sacrifices made along the way. Some victories arrive carrying permanent reminders of their true cost. Number 53. In 2001, energy giant Enron looked unstoppable. Business magazines praised its executives as visionary geniuses, analysts celebrated endless innovation, and employees proudly filled retirement accounts with company stock because leadership constantly insisted the future had never looked brighter. Behind the polished image, however, executives hid staggering debt inside complicated accounting structures designed to make enormous losses disappear from public reports. Investors continued buying shares because everyone else seemed convinced Enron represented the future of American business. Then investigators began asking uncomfortable questions. Within weeks, confidence collapsed. Stock prices became nearly worthless, and thousands of employees watched both their careers and retirement savings vanish simultaneously. Executives who had preached limitless growth faced criminal convictions instead. Enron's greatest mistake wasn't simply committing fraud, it was believing complexity could permanently outrun honesty. Financial statements may confuse investors for a while, but reality always audits the books eventually. Number 54. Some terrible decisions unfold over decades instead of moments. Easter Island once supported thriving forests, abundant wildlife, and a flourishing Polynesian civilization. As generations expanded, people cut increasing numbers of trees for homes, fishing canoes, farming, and transporting the island's famous stone statues. Each individual decision probably seemed reasonable at the time. One more tree wouldn't matter, then another disappeared. Eventually, the forests were gone completely. Without trees, soil eroded, agriculture declined, large boats could no longer be built, and resources became desperately scarce. Historians continue debating every detail of the island's decline, but the broader lesson remains powerful. Civilizations rarely collapse because of one spectacular mistake. More often, they slowly accumulate thousands of small decisions that seem harmless in isolation, until one day everyone suddenly realizes the future has quietly been spent. Nature usually sends warnings long before it sends consequences. Number 55. If one story perfectly captures the price of terrible decisions, it belongs to the crew of the whaling ship Essex. In 1820, after years of successful voyages, the crew believed they understood every danger the Pacific Ocean could possibly deliver. Then they harpooned a massive sperm whale that responded in a way nobody expected. The enraged animal rammed the ship repeatedly until the vessel sank beneath them, leaving the crew stranded thousands of miles from civilization. Faced with several possible routes to safety, the officers rejected the shortest course because they feared rumors of cannibalistic islands. Instead, they chose the vastly longer path across open ocean, believing it seemed safer. That single navigation decision condemned many of them to starvation, dehydration, and unimaginable suffering before the few survivors were finally rescued. Sometimes the worst choice isn't obviously reckless. It's simply the one that feels comfortable while quietly leading straight toward disaster. Human history never runs out of bad ideas. Which decision shocked you the most? Let everyone know in the comments.